Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, hi, my name is Anna, and it is the 1st of October, which means that I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I read in the month of September, and all of the books that I want to read in the month of October, which I am so excited for, because I don't know if I've said this here on YouTube, I don't know, so I'm just going to say it anyways. I love October, okay? It's my favorite month out of the entire year, because I absolutely love Halloween. I'm a sucker for it. I love anything that is spooky, anything that is just creepy, eerie, weird, and it's so crazy because a few years back, I didn't really like watching horror movies. I didn't like watching them because I would always get scared when it was time to go to sleep. I just could not fall asleep. But the more I watched them, the less scary they became. And honestly, this is the logic that I use. If it's something, for example, like Annabelle, where it involves dolls, or for example, it's a certain curse or something, just something that you have to do, I don't really get scared anymore, because how is that going to happen to me if I don't do those things? You know what I'm saying? So that's why I always choose movies where it cannot possibly happen to me. When it's spirits and ghosts, that one is a little tricky, because that can happen to anyone. But okay, I'm literally derailing. I'm just on a rant at this point. But what I'm trying to say is I absolutely love Halloween. Okay, it's one of my favorite months. So I am just so excited to read all of the spooky books that I can, because it's just a different vibe, when you read them in October. And without further ado, let's talk about all of the books I read in the month of September. So the first book I finished in the month of September was A Feast for Crows by George R. Martin, and I'm not really going to talk too much about it because I did a whole dedicated reading vlog, so if you haven't watched it, please go and check it out. And this was a disappointment. Not that the book is bad by any means, it is not bad. I gave it 4 stars. It's very solid. It's still a good book. It just wasn't what I was expecting. I didn't really like the characters that we were following. It was necessary. George R. Martin did say that he wanted to write a book where he showed us what was happening at King's Landing, and it was important. It's something that needed to happen because we needed to understand the political context of everything that was happening there, because obviously when you're at King's Landing, that's where the Iron Throne is, which means you are ruling the entirety of the Seven Kingdoms. So of course you need to know everything about the politics, what was happening, who was in charge, which in this case it was Cersei. It was fun though. It was really, really fun to follow Cersei's downfall, because she always kept saying like, oh, I am so capable of ruling. I am just as capable as my father too. And sure, babes. Sure, because she literally in 1 year, I think, or less than 1 year, she ruined the whole thing. And now she's hostage of this crazy cult. It was just insane, to be honest, to just see how fast her downfall was. It was comical, to be honest. But that was my main qualm with that book. It was just the characters that we were following, because I just wasn't interested in them, or I just did not like them at all, which made the reading experience much more difficult. And there were some plot lines that became a little bit too repetitive, in my opinion. For example, I love Brienne. I absolutely love her character. I will always like her, but just the plot of her always trying to find Sansa and getting a few clues here and there, but never getting to, her objective, it just became too repetitive. I'm a little bit tired of it, and I just wanted a little bit more from Brienne. But nonetheless, it was a solid book, and I cannot wait to read A Dance with Dragons. And the second book that I read was actually, considered the best fantasy book in 2024, which was The Will of the Many by James Islington. And let me tell you right now, I am disappointed, okay? I am highly disappointed, because this book, I think that was the problem. The problem was this book is so overhyped and is pitched as a perfect book. It's amazing in every single front, when that is not the case. That is not the truth. And it just left, because my expectations were so high, the disappointment was even bigger. And I do have to give this book a 3.75 stars, which, like I said, it's just so far away from the 5-star book that I was expecting. And here's the number one issue that I had with this book. Viz is my number one issue. I do not like him as a protagonist at all. First of all, he doesn't really have a personality. But you know what? I'm not going to fault him on that, because there are some characters that don't really have a personality that I still do enjoy. The problem that I had with Viz was what I was afraid of, because the only criticism that I've ever saw on this book was the fact that Viz was a Gary Stu, or had, moments of being a Gary Stu. And oh my god, does this man, it's just so aggravating, because this man, he's perfect at everything. He knows everything. He learns fast. Like, there's just nothing that he's not good at. And I understand that his education was privileged, because he comes from, a background where he was the prince of a kingdom. So he does have a very, privileged education. Sure, but what do you mean that education? You know, it taught him everything. Like, thank God this man had that education and had the best of the best teaching him. Otherwise, I don't know what would have happened to him. And it's just so aggravating. It really, really is, because you want consequences to happen, and he didn't suffer any consequences until the very end of the book, which was so annoying to see, because there was a point in the book where I was just rolling my eyes like, of course you know how to do this. Of course you were taught this. Of course you're the best at this. Like, he learned everything in the book, and it's just so aggravating, because then the stakes you just don't feel the stakes. The stakes are non-existent, because he will never suffer a single consequence in this book. So that is the main criticism that I have for The Will of the Many. But there were other things. So for example, the magic system, I do not understand how it works. And I feel like for a first book, you need to understand how it works. The author didn't really give us the basics, and I understand that it's not really an important part of the book, because in the academy you can't use magic, so I understand why he didn't really include the magic system, but you need to understand the basics, in my opinion at least, and I don't understand the basics. I don't even know how it works. I literally do not know. But I do love the writing of this book. My God, the writing and the story are so captivating. I was addicted, okay? Whenever I picked up this book, I could not stop reading it, because, like I said, the writing was addictive. James Islington knew how to write this book, because every single chapter ended with a cliffhanger, and I was hooked. I always wanted to know what was going to happen. I always wanted to know how Vis was going to get out of that situation, how he was going to solve things, what was going to happen to him. Everything was just so well written, and that's why it's just so frustrating to me, because it could have been such an amazing book. It had the potential to actually be a 5-star if Vis had suffered consequences. If he had more flaws as a character, I do think this book could have been a 5-star easily, because this writing and the way that he structured the narrative and the pacing, it was just so spot on. And then at the end of this month, I did finish, Isles of the Emberdark, and I'm lying, okay? I finished this today, the 1st of October, but I do not care, okay? I am going to include this in my September wrap-up, because it's just one day. I could have finished it yesterday, but I was so goddamn tired. I was so tired, and I still have 50 pages to go, so I was like, you know what? I finish it tomorrow, but I'm still including this in my September wrap-up, because it's my video, my rules, so we're just gonna pretend I finished this yesterday. And honestly, it's a 3.5. And it wasn't anything, outstanding. It just wasn't anything that shocked me. I don't know. I think this book, it has a very science fiction setting, and I don't like science fiction. I think I've tried to force myself to read science fiction, and I don't really enjoy it. It's just not really my thing. And I understand that the Cosmere is walking towards that path. I understand that, but I don't really like it. So the setting wasn't really my favorite. And then we had one plot line, which is Starling. I didn't care. I just did not care about her plot line. I understand how it tied to the main story. I understand that, but I just didn't really care. I did like the dynamic of the crew, of her crew, and how all of them get along, and how they're all just the dynamics is just really, really funny. But anything beyond that, I just didn't really care about her. I didn't really care about the fact that she was trying to escape with her crew. It just wasn't my thing. But I did absolutely love Dusk, because as you know, I read Six of the Dusk back in August, and I absolutely loved him as a character, so I loved following him again. I just really like following competent characters, and that is one thing that Dusk is. He is competent. He is one of the best trappers alive. So seeing him explore, the Emberdark, and really explore that place of darkness where you just don't have any lights whatsoever. Everything is just so dark, so murky. Even the water is not really water. It's just some sort of void. It was just so cool, and I absolutely loved that part of the book. But like I said, I don't really like the setting. Starling plotline, it just wasn't really my favorite. I didn't really care for her. I didn't care what happened to her. So I do have to say that this is a solid 3.5 stars. It's not the worst, Brandon Sanderson book out there, but it's also not the best. And I'm a little bit disappointed, because I thought I was going to like this book much, much more. But still, it's a solid read. And if you do like the Cosmere and you're a fan, then you should absolutely read this, because, oh my God, you have so many breadcrumbs of the Cosmere and just so many clues of what's to come. So now let's talk about all the books I want to read in the month of October, and I'm going to be starting with Dance with Dragons by George R. R. Martin. Now, I will be starting this book. I'm not probably going to finish it in October, but I just really want to start it and probably finish it in the beginning of November, if I'm being completely honest. And of course, I'm excited, okay? It's a little bit bittersweet, because, I've been reading A Song of Ice and Fire ever since this year started, I think January. So it has been a very, very long ride, and I've just been loving this series so much. I understand the hype that it gets. I understand why people say it's a masterpiece, because it truly, truly is. And it's bittersweet because, I'm going to be finishing it, and I don't want to, I don't want this to be the last book, and I don't want to join the group of people that is, waiting for George R. R. Martin to actually finish this series, but I also do have to read it because if I don't, I'm going to forget everything that has happened. And, ever since Game of Thrones, some details have escaped me. Sometimes I don't really remember who the hell is talking, and I'm just like, where did you come from? So I know that I have to read this as fast as possible so I don't forget any details from A Feast for Crows because it's very political. It was a very political book. So I do need to understand everything that is going on. And that's why I do need to read this book at least this month or, just read most of it. And yeah, it's just a little bit bittersweet to be finishing A Song of Ice and Fire this year. And of course, I do want to read Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Finally, I'll be reading this classic. I've only heard great things about this woman, about this story. And I think she, this was her debut novel, I think she wrote this for a contest. I think it was as a dare to prove that she knew how to write. It was something along these lines, I think. And honestly, just slay, just slay, aura, everything that the kids say these days. She has aura, okay? Because if this is the first thing that she writes and it became a classic and she wrote this just for a contest, are you fucking for real? It's just insane. It's just insane moves, okay, from this woman. But of course, we all know the story of Frankenstein. And honestly, I'm expecting a lot of, themes about humanity, what it is to be human, what makes us human, how we yearn for love and connection with other people. That is what I'm expecting from this book. And of course, we all know just, the story of Frankenstein. So I'm not going to be here telling you what the story is about. I'm expecting amazing writing, of course, because this is a classic. So I am extremely excited to be reading this book. And I don't know why. I just have a feeling that I'm just going to absolutely love this book. And it's going to become one of my favorite classics of all time. And then it couldn't be the month of October if we didn't have a Stephen King book. And in this case, I have The Intruder. I think it's called The Outsider. In English, I do have the Portuguese version from my library. And I just, I picked this one up. I wanted Salem's Lot, but they didn't have it at my library, unfortunately. And this one seemed, the next interesting one. And I'm just very excited because this is a thriller and I absolutely love that. This is an investigation. We have a murderer and I just love that, okay? And it just sounded so interesting. And I think we find an 11-year-old. He was found dead. I think he had disappeared, and then he was found dead, and nobody knows who killed him. I think this is in a small town setting. Hold on. Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, I think this is a very small town setting, and they all suspect this one English teacher, and he actually gets accused and he goes to jail. So everybody's like, okay, everything is fine now. The murderer has been caught. But the police officer that is investigating this murder doesn't think it was the teacher because he had an alibi. And she's asking, herself, how can he be at the murder scene because his DNA was there? It was confirmed that he was there, but also be at the other place that he was, which people confirmed he was. So how can he be in two places at the same time? And that is what really intrigued me to read this book. And I have read Stephen King before. I read, last year Pet Sematary, and it wasn't really what I was expecting. When I went to Pet Sematary, I really wanted to read a horror book. I wanted something to spook me, to scare me, to just make me shake and tremble. But it wasn't that. It is, Pet Sematary is so well written. I will never take that away from Stephen King. You could feel the atmosphere and the creepiness and the eeriness. It was disturbing. Yeah, it was a disturbing book, but it just wasn't what I had been expecting because I wanted to be scared. I wanted to be, jumping and just having chills all over my body, and that wasn't really what I got. So I was a little bit disappointed because people said that Pet Sematary was just, the most disturbing book and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, yeah, it is disturbing, but it's not as disturbing as I thought it would be, and I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. So I wasn't, I'm not really expecting a lot from this book. I'm not really expecting it to be spooky, to be scary, and to give, chills down my spine. But I am expecting to be very, very entertained and at least addicted to this police investigation because The Outsider, what does that mean? And, and look at this cover. It just means that something is lurking in the woods, and I need that, okay? I just need some sort of creepiness, eeriness, and because I have those expectations already, I don't think I'm going to be disappointed with this book. And next, I have, just some short stories by a Portuguese author, and I'm very, very excited to read these because, it's not very common, or at least I don't really see a lot of authors, at least in Portugal, Portuguese authors writing a lot of horror stories, and it's so short. Look at these. It is so short. I can read, one short story a day. I have heard that it's not spooky in the sense of it's not supposed to scare you. It's not supposed to, make you have jump scares or anything. This is very much a gothic vibe type of book, so it's going to be a lot of atmosphere, which I do not mind mind at all because I already have that expectation. So I'm not expecting, you know, to be spooked out or scared out, but I do expect to have some lovely writing with some just ambiance, you know, just some spooky Halloween ambiance. And I actually don't really know much more about this because I like going into, you know, short stories without knowing anything because I just want to be surprised. So yeah, I'm very excited to read a horror book by a Portuguese author. And finally, to end this month of October, I do want to read Frankenstein by Junji Ito. And this is going to be, you know, a month full of Frankenstein apparently because I just thought, you know, it would be perfect if I read Frankenstein by Mary Shelley and then, you know, the adaptation and the way that Junji Ito decided to interpret Frankenstein because I love this man, okay? I love Junji Ito. I think he's one of the greatest mangaka of horror. He is, you know, just the father of horror. I love all of the works that that I've read of his, which is Uzumaki, Tomi, and Gyo, and this is going to be my fourth. So I have very, very high expectation for Junji Ito, and I'm going to be reading this on the 31st of October. So I'm going to be reading this in the Halloween day at midnight, or probably, I don't know, midnight, it seems a little bit early, maybe 1, 2 a.m. I really wanted to read this at 3 a.m., which is the witching hour, but I don't think I can stay up until that late because I am an early bird, and I don't like going to bed late. So maybe 1 a.m., 2 a.m., I'm going to be reading this just so I could feel, you know, the vibes. I'm going to turn on, you know, my red lights. It's just going to be a whole vibe, a whole mood. So yeah, I'm very, very excited for this manga. And honestly, I didn't notice, but this is really going to be a Frankenstein moment because then in November, I think there's going to be a new Frankenstein movie on Netflix by Guillermo del Toro, which is just a horror director that I just absolutely love. So I'm just very, very excited because it's everything is just so Frankenstein-y, and I absolutely love it because, like I said, I have a feeling that I'm just going to absolutely love the classic, and I'm just going to love, you know, this manga, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to love the movie because it's Guillermo del Toro, so there's nothing that can go wrong, or at least I really, really hope so. And these were all of the books I read in the month of September and all of the books I want to read in the month of October. Please let me know down in the comments below, you know, what was your favorite book in September? What books did you read in September? What is your October TBR? Do you like Halloween? Do you not really care for it? And if you don't really care for it, just don't say it. Okay, just don't say it because it really hurts my feelings. And I think the reason why I'm so sensitive, and yes, this is going to be a rant, is because here in Portugal, in my country, people don't really celebrate Halloween. Halloween is not celebrated, which it just breaks my heart. And I always have candy. I always have candy ready for the kids in case they want to trick or treat, but that is so rare. It rarely happens, and when it does, it just fills my heart with joy. So if you don't like Halloween, just don't say it, okay? Just don't say anything. And yeah, I'm just so excited to read all of these books because they all sound spooky. I have, you know, a mixture of everything. I have a fantasy book, I have a horror manga, I have, you know, a classic, I have some horror short stories, I even have a thriller by the king himself of horror, which is Stephen King. So I only have good reads, and honestly, I am expecting this month to be amazing, to just have so many 5 stars, because it has to be that way, okay? And even if it's not, I'm just absolutely going to love all of these books nonetheless, because it's going to give me the feeling of spookiness, of eeriness, of creepiness, which is something that I absolutely love. Like I said, in the month of October, it's just perfect, okay? It's just absolutely perfect. But yeah, with that, please subscribe and like this video because it really does help my channel out, and it gives me motivation and validation to continue filming these videos for you guys. And I will see you in my next video. Goodbye!